I'm Phil Holland, and it's my pleasure to announce or to welcome Dr. Lindsay Peer, CBE. She's a fellow of both the International Academy of Research in Learning Disabilities and the Royal Society of Arts. She holds a PhD in psychology from the University of Sheffield, where her thesis postulated the links between glue ear, bilingualism, and dyslexia. The CBE, for those who don't know, stands for Commander of the British Empire, and it's a high and rare distinction, especially for educators. But Dr. Peer is an exceptional educator, a longtime teacher of English as a foreign language, and one who has served as a consultant to the European Commission, to government bodies, teachers' unions, educational and psychological institutions, and of course parents. I asked Dr. Peer how she had become interested in dyslexia, and she told me that she has 3 children, all dyslexic in varying degrees, including a severely dyslexic son. She was told that her young son should be sent to a special school for the ineducable. That's quite a word. She took that as a personal challenge. Her son is now 31. He's an architect with a master's degree. She told me that that is where her passion for her subject comes from. She's a widely traveled speaker, and we are indeed fortunate that she's traveled to Thessaloniki to speak to us today. You see her subject right there. And before she takes the mic, I want to mention that she has recently published a book, and you can learn more about this book. There's a handout outside. It is called Special Educational Needs, a Guide for Inclusive Practice, and it came out a couple of months ago. So, hot off the press, and you can learn more about it outside. Dr. Peer.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Oh, dear. Good morning, everybody. Well, that's better. Okay, very nice to see you all. Thank you, those that arrived on time, and particularly thank you to those who arrived early. I came in, there was one gentleman and myself, and I thought, well, this is going to be an interesting interlude today. So very nice to see you all. Okay, I have an hour in which to share with you dyslexia, get you to understand it, and understand the emotional aspects that go with it. And I speak to you not only as a professional, but, as Phil said, as a mother. And I have to say, of all these special educational needs with which I now deal, the one, of course, that I know the most, excuse me, we have to breathe in, 10 years younger, 10 pounds thinner would be good if you could manage that. The one that I know most, of course, is dyslexia, because that's what I've lived with. However, all of you will have dyslexic children in your classes. The research suggests that within a monolingual community, about 10% of children are dyslexic. The number is higher within a bilingual, multilingual community. So if you have a class of 30 children, you're likely more or less to have 3 kids in every class. That's a lot of kids. Dyslexia is a bit like taking a 12-inch ruler. You could either be at one end and just have a bit of a spelling problem, bit disorganized, bit of a memory problem, or you could be very severe and not be able to read, write, or spell. And in this hour, I'm going to share with you as much as I possibly can. There is a handout. I understand from Roger. Sorry? Okay, thank you. I understand from Roger that he is happy to send the handout to everybody who wants it if you email him. So please don't feel that you've got to scribble your notes everywhere. He does already have it. So we're starting off with a doctor, Dr. Pringle Morgan. Many, many years ago, in 1896, met a boy called Percy. And Percy was 14, and Percy's mum and dad brought him to see the doctor and said, our son's got a problem in school. So he asked Percy to write his name, and Percy wrote Pressy. He reversed the E and the R. And the doctor was very curious about this, so he went into the school and he spoke to the headmaster of the school. And the headmaster very significantly said, if everything was done orally, Percy would be at the top of the school. However, because we do things with reading and writing, he will always be at the bottom. And Dr. Pringle Morgan was so taken, so struck by this, that he said there's a condition here. And he wrote about it, and you can find it in the British Medical Journal of 1896. Long time ago. Dyslexia is not new. It's just that we didn't know about it. So what sort of problems do dyslexic people have? Well, they have problems with reading, writing, spelling, sometimes with maths, and reading, of course, is also reading of music. So sometimes people are very good at playing what they hear, but they actually can't read the music. Coordination and direction, speed of processing, remembering things, new language learning, very significant for yourselves, stress, anxiety, and low self-esteem. All of these issues are sitting in this little boy, little girl in your class, and they're struggling to focus and attend to your lesson and everybody else's lesson 5 days a week from morning to afternoon. Now, this is very, very stressful for these kids. Be under no illusion that, well, let's put it this way. If you were not happy at school and you decided that you wanted a new job, you would seek a new job. These days you'd be lucky to get one. However, you would seek one. If you were not happy with your husband or your wife, you might seek a new one of those as well, but I won't go there. But what does a child do? A child sits in school. The chances of a child changing school are minimal. And actually, if they change school, is the teaching that they're going to get any more suitable, any more appropriate than it might be in the school they're at the moment? So they go into school and they really have to struggle. What are the causes of the difficulties that you see in the classroom? Well, I've listed them here. And very quickly, let's go through them. Visual processing. Like Percy, some people actually reverse letters. But not all dyslexic people do that. In fact, some dyslexic people can read quite well, surprisingly. When you read, sometimes I have dyslexic children who tell me that they can't stay along the line. Tracking is a problem. So you'll find children much older than you think using a finger, using a thumb down the edge to stay on the edge of the page. Children will often say to me, they go up a line, they read the lines again, they drop down a few lines, they're backwards and forwards, they finish the paragraph, finish the page, they have no idea what they've read, obviously. Adults will say to me, sometimes they look at a page of text and they see the white lines rather than the words. Very occasionally, you'll have people who will describe the letters dancing on the page or swirling around. And in the book that we've just brought out that Phil just mentioned, there's actually a chapter in there about the visual difficulties that some people experience. That's a physical difficulty, and it needs to be addressed by what in England we call behavioural optometry. These are people like super opticians who have specialised in vision in relation to the written word. As far as auditory processing is concerned, in a sense it's linked to working memory and to glue ear. Glue ear is that condition that many, many babies have, many little children have, where that tube that goes from the ear in is blocked by a glue-like substance. In order to hear well, we need to have air going through. There's 3 little bones at the end that vibrate, and that's how we hear. But what happens is that that fills up. Now, for some children, they grow out of it and there's no problem. For other children, it actually remains a significant problem, and can cause problems with the development of language, with processing, with memory, and then move into literacy difficulties. Glue ear is often not related to difficulties with literacy because it's dealt by health people. We need to make that difference by explaining to educators that actually we need to ask the question of the parent, has your child had successive ear infections? Has your child had suspected loss of hearing? Has your child ever gone through stages of distractibility which might be linked to heavy colds that go on for weeks and weeks? If that is the case, certainly in the UK, many children will have what they call grommets. They're little plastic tubes that get put in the ears. Other children will have antibiotic, but it's a signal to us as teachers that there's a problem. Adults who've had glue ear as a child, even if they've grown out of it, very, very often have problems learning new languages. They have problems sitting around the dining room table and having a conversation because there's a lot of background noise. Go to a party, they can't follow the conversation. Take that into the classroom, you've got 30 noisy children, they can't hear what's being said. So their processing becomes limited. There's also an issue of laterality, which compounds the problem. Research tells us if you're very right-sided or very left-sided, there's no problem. And by sided, I mean eye, ear, hand and foot. The problem comes when you're a bit of both, when you're cross-lateral, and that causes a problem. Now, there's a very famous man in England called Duncan Goodhue. Could you raise your hand if you've ever heard of him? Aha, I see who the British people are. Welcome. Okay, Duncan Goodhue is a very famous swimmer, to the extent that he won gold medals for Britain. I'm not talking out of turn, because he talks about this quite regularly in the press. Duncan Goodhue is severely dyslexic. Duncan and I were speaking on a platform like this one day, and I thought, what am I going to talk to him about for 10 minutes before I start speaking? So I said to him, Duncan, what did you find most challenging at school? And I thought he would say reading, writing, spelling, maths, something to do with that. And he said to me, PE, physical education. So I said, OK, Duncan, that was a serious question. He said, that was a serious answer. I said, but you must have been fit. Now, that was the old meaning of fit, meaning healthy, not the young, I'm married, not the new meaning of fit. So I said to him, what was the problem? He said, well, do you remember when you would go into the PE class, they'd take you onto the field and there'd be two captains. And one would say, I want you. And the next one would say, I want you, I want you, I want you. And his shoulder went up and he said to me, nobody wanted me. I said, why not? Didn't you like football? He said, I loved football. I will tell you what the problem was. He said, I would go onto the football pitch and I was really good and I would get lots of goals, but I could never remember which direction I was supposed to be kicking. So I got goals for everybody and nobody wanted me. So he said, that's why I became a swimmer. He said, I jump in the water and I go up and down and I have no problem. Good careers advice. We also know that our dyslexic children have an autoimmune system which functions less well than others. So there's a higher incidence of asthma, of eczema, of allergies to milk, to all sorts of other things. Children who have colds that last a bit longer, they're the ones that are away from school a bit more. They're actually the ones we need in school a bit more. So we know that there is a huge physical problem going on with dyslexic children. And I've given you a list here, and you can have it on that handout if you ask Roger. He'll send it to you, as I said. All the current theories, if you want the science behind it. But also our dyslexic people have a range of strengths. And we mustn't forget those strengths. They are really able to think outside the box. These are people who are very, very skilled in arts, in drama, in sciences, in architecture. The art schools, all of these areas are full of people who are otherwise people who might fail were they in another environment. Again, Roger has a list of people, or you can look up yourselves, famous dyslexic people, look it up online, and you'll get loads of people. You will be amazed. Common thoughts of dyslexic people. And these are things that have been said to me by children. I must be stupid. No one understands. They bully me. I do silly things to make people laugh. I'll never be anything. That's pretty damning. And I often feel that when teachers come in, if you've got a child who feels like this, in a sense, you are a counsellor before you are a teacher. You've got to get the child to believe that he can learn, she can learn, and that they can make progress, because they feel pretty bad about themselves very often. Have a look at this. Take a few seconds and see if you can work out what this 7.5-year-old actually wrote. This is a monolingual child, not a bilingual child. Anybody know what he wrote? Anybody want to take a guess? Okay. Okay, it's the second word that's the problem, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, let me tell you what it is. And think about how long you are sitting here trying to decode what that child actually wrote. Think about 30 children in the class and the homework that you mark, or the classwork that you do. Some children will write like that and immediately can't read back what they've written. Some children can remember what they wrote, so if you've got children who are more severely dyslexic in the class, do them a favour and ask them to tell you what they've written immediately after they've written it. That says, I sometimes row my daddy to the shore and put the engine on the boat. As far as English is concerned, he would have got a really good mark because it's a very well-structured sentence. As far as the spelling is concerned, where are you going to go? If you always mark these children's work at a very low level, because they can't spell, they'll stop writing. I know children who've said to me, I won't try the word feline, I'd rather write cat, because I'm less likely to get it wrong. Dyslexic children who won't write a page of work, they'll write that much, because there's less chance of getting it wrong. We need to encourage our children to write and then to redraft and recorrect. So the first problem this child had, the I on the right-hand side was crossed through. He had a laterality problem. He didn't know his right from his left. And the teacher said to him, you've been in school 2.5 years, don't you know which side to start on yet? And the child said no, and he got into trouble. He didn't know, otherwise he would have done. But if somebody had sat with him and put a little red spot on the top left-hand side, all the way through his book, he would have always known which side to start, and then he would have got used to the idea. So, the second problem was sometimes he didn't hear the sound He was a glue ear child. If he didn't hear it, he will never spell it. Sometimes. So you might say to me, well, he can hear in my. Well, that's actually a much stronger My book, my teddy, my toy. Shoren. There's an N on the end of shore. Where did that come from? Well, you might decide that tonight, having studied hard all day today, you're not going to cook. So you're going to go home, certainly in England you would, and you might go and buy fish and chips. But you know it's not really fish and, You know that it's fish and chips. He knew there was an and he put it in. But the n was there because he can't hear the beginnings of words and the end of words. He can't separate syllables. You need to teach your children how to do that if they're going to read properly. Now, people often get children to clap or to tap syllables. Very often they can't see the connection with what they're actually trying to do. So what I suggest to teachers is to get your hand under your chin, or as my son says, under your chins. He's very rude. Right? Put your hand under your chin a second. Okay? Say the word flower out loud. Flower. What do you feel? Every time there's a syllable, your chin drops. That's where the syllable slash goes. Flower. So these sorts of tricks cost nothing, but are extremely helpful to children like this. As far as engine is concerned, he didn't hear on because he got tired and he was doing this with his hand. How many of our children hold their pens really tight? It's a struggle for them to write. Sometimes it's a physical thing added to an emotional problem. So he's doing this, and the teacher says, come on everybody, hurry up, you've nearly finished. So he looks at his work and he said, oh, I've done on. It's part of engine. I don't need to do it again on the boat. And then the teacher says, OK, everybody, check your work and give it in. And he does what so many dyslexic kids do. He does this. Picks up his work, looks at it and said, checked it. Because he doesn't know how. The other problem we can pick up from here is that huge space in the middle. This child was in a school where they didn't agree with giving children lined papers. They believed that lined paper would take away creativity. What rubbish is that? He needs to have the structure. Let's have a look at this one. This is an extreme case of reversals. I'll read it for you. This girl's 14. Listen to it while you're reading it. The best part of school is the parties we have. In the middle of the night, when the moon is shining like a swollen silver coin in the sky, we creep out of our beds and tiptoe downstairs into the basement. The light of a flickering candle follows our silhouette around the bleak walls. Shall we have it under the table? In case you thought any different, it was a bottle of wine she was talking about. Shall we have it under the table? Says one shivering girl, her gaze falling upon the secure, four-footed plank. That is beautiful English. I'm sure you will agree. That girl's work was consistently thrown in the bin by her teacher. She stopped writing. Today, somebody with significant levels of difficulty like that, I would be putting on a laptop, because you can't reverse your letters when you're on a computer. You just can't do it. That is extreme. But have a look at what happened in the psychological assessment when she was asked to write half an hour later. With no intervention, no teaching going on, she wrote the following. Celia is a huge rhinoceros. She plays ice hockey. When I have a house of my own, I will put my bed in the kitchen. Fair enough. What differences do we see? There's no intervention, no teaching gone on. Are there any reversals? Is the handwriting different? Is it less creative? Yes. So what's the difference? The difference is that these second ones were dictation. The first one was having to come from her own head. We say to our children, we're going to have a surprise test today. Who's the surprise for? No one's going to do well if they're in a state of shock. Right? Tell them, next Monday you're going to have a test and we're going to look at X, Y, and Z. Fine. Don't give them a surprise. This doesn't help. But in the first one, she had to think about handwriting, spelling, direction of letters, what she wanted to say, and the teacher's there with the clock. The next one, word by word, Celia. Aha, Celia. I can join my letters. Which way round does it go? Nobody's limiting me to time, and so on and so forth. That is why dictation, spelling tests, children making progress in spelling tests is good to a degree, but it does not signify that the knowledge they have gained has transferred into the general curriculum. You, as English teachers, will see the difference. This one I love. I'm just going to read it to you. When you get the PowerPoint from Roger, have a look at it, because it's a very amusing piece of work. It's called rice pudding. This was the boys' homework. Rice pudding reminds me of diarrhea with custard mixed in. It makes me feel sick just at the slightest sniff of it. It's vile, repulsive, and revolting. Absolutely revolting. The thing that gets me is the school still gives us it. I personally think it should have a government health warning on it. For all we know, it is radioactive and contaminated with weed killer. They must be trying to bump us off. God knows what they have in it. Help! Help! Right. Now, you could spend a whole workshop taking that one apart and seeing what he's done. I mean, taking something like, I personally think, he doesn't know if it's a G or a K, so he'll give you both, right? The punctuation, question marks instead of exclamation marks, because he hasn't got a clue. That tells us so much about the child, but it also tells us how creative he is. And given a microphone, how good he would be. But when it comes to writing, he has a problem. Now, there is a debate in the research world. Some people believe that dyslexia is based on a phonological problem, and that would actually suit and match the problems with glue ear. For the majority of dyslexic people, there is a phonological problem, even if they haven't had a glue ear problem. And that means that they're not hearing the sounds as well as they might. It means that they're not processing the auditory information as they might. They've got a deficit in that area. And that definition, description of what goes on was actually very much the one that was held for a very, very long time. And it was headed by people like Professor Maggie Snowling, who was a speech therapist. And of course, they picked up on these speech issues and on the processing issues because that was in their domain. Maggie Snowling, by the way, is now a psychologist. She's also a very senior professor at York University. If you want to read her work, you can find her. I come back to the visual difficulties because a smaller number of dyslexic people have the visual difficulties that I explained earlier. And if you look up the British Association of Behavioural Optometrists, they have a website, they explain all the various different things, the problems that the child has, and they believe that that is the reason behind dyslexia. There are some people who have both problems, and this, of course, is even more of an issue. But what about the emotional effects of dyslexia when it's not picked up? There was some research that took place in Western Australia, and the researchers said adults with undiagnosed dyslexia can face serious social problems because of literacy difficulties. We live in a society that says if you have good literacy, you are competent, but if you don't, then you are worthless. All the people I interviewed felt that they were dumb because that's how they'd been made to feel, even if they were successful in many other ways. And she concluded that teachers needed to understand a great deal more than they do, and that's only by training. Professor Robert Brooks at Harvard in 2001 said, "I have had the opportunity to work with many children and adolescents with learning disorders during the last 30 years. In conducting therapy with these youths, I became increasingly aware that most were burdened by feelings of low self-worth and incompetence, and that many believed that their situation would not improve. Not surprisingly, this sense of hopelessness served as a major obstacle to future success. Once children believe that things will not improve, they're likely to engage in self-defeating ways of coping, such as quitting, avoiding tasks, blaming others for their difficulties, or becoming class clowns or bullies. Thus, a negative cycle is set in motion, intensifying feelings of defeat and despair. Be under no illusion. Dyslexic people, given the right opportunities, the right sort of teaching, can go on to achieve just like everybody else. And if they're lucky, and they happen to be particularly talented, will go on to become great politicians, great artists, great dramatists, great musicians, great doctors, great everybody else. But if they're not, then you have people who feel that they are worthless. We, as parents and teachers, have the opportunity to create that change by learning more. And what happens in a situation where people are learning new languages? Well, there are various problems which are encountered within that world. First of all, we need to understand and perceive different sounds and intonation of sounds. If you've got an auditory processing problem, that can be very difficult. I have assessed children who cannot hear the difference between a, e, a. How, therefore, do you choose the right letters to write it? That can be a problem. Different inferences, different pace of language. You go to some countries, people are talking very fast, using their hands. You go to other countries, it's much slower, much more even. You look at somebody bilingual and their whole body language will actually change as they speak, which is a fascinating thing to see. But actually, quite a challenge when you are coming into a classroom where you are being taught a new language by somebody who actually presents very differently. Vocabulary can be used in a range of ways. I talked before about Duncan Goodhue being fit. I meant fit being physically healthy and able. But fit, as we know, can also mean, whoa, nice looking guy, right? So how we use language, what words we use, what is in current acceptance not, can be different. And what about chat versus academic language? That too is different. We know that our children coming into a new situation, a new language, a new society, will pick up chat language relatively quickly. Throw the ball, chuck it over here. Let's go play in the playground. You want to go on the computer? Those sorts of things. But academic language can actually take 7 or 8 years for somebody, even without dyslexia, to attain. How much more so with somebody who has significant problems with dyslexia? We also know that body language is slightly different in different languages. What would you say if I said to you like this? Oh, I'm having a great time. Am I? No. Are you telling me I'm a liar? Why? Because our body tells us so much more. We're looking for cues the whole time. When you work with somebody from another culture, you work with somebody with a different accent and you are dyslexic on top of it, there's an awful lot more processing which has to go on to work out what the person is saying. You know you've never been taught body language, I suspect, but you know. You know how close to stand to somebody, you know about looking in their eyes, you know about reading them. But not necessarily the dyslexic person when he's got so many other things to be looking at as well. And then we have to explain real meanings of things. Comments like, it's a piece of cake. What do I mean by it's a piece of cake? It's easy. But if I said to somebody who didn't know the language, let alone somebody dyslexic, it's a piece of cake, what do you think you might get for your essay? Okay, they might write about the cake very nicely. Go on, kids, break a leg. What does break a leg mean? Go and do it well. Hope everything goes well for you. Good luck. But they might think, why does she want me to break a leg? Right? Now, it's not because they don't understand. It's because they're not used to this sort of thing. And there is so much that they have to remember that these things become more challenging on top of it all. What about being, I'm tied up, right? I'm tied up. I can remember the child that I was teaching at school, age 9, who was sobbing, absolutely sobbing. And he was a bilingual child who was also very severely dyslexic. And I said to him, why are you crying, Peter? And I said, what happened? Couldn't speak. So I said to the school secretary, who was standing near him, completely at a loss, I said, what happened? She said, his mum's going to be late. I said, is that a problem, Peter? So I said, what did you say to Peter? She said, I told him that mum was tied up at the office. You can see where Peter's problem came from. All right, we have more problems. All right, if you are dyslexic, it is possible that you also have other issues going on. You may be dyspraxic. Dyspraxic meaning that it's difficult to control the motor movements. So you might be somebody who finds it very difficult to balance. Go on, let's try this. Let's wake you up a bit. Put your papers down and stand up. Let it not be said that you didn't do exercise today. Okay, if you're wearing high heels, be careful. Right, put your arms out to the side. Right. Okay. Put one leg up. Bend your knee. Right. And close your eyes. Fascinating. Right, try the other leg. Arms out. Close your eyes. And try and balance. Okay, sit down. Now, what did we learn from this? This is not a diagnosis for dyspraxia, I hasten to add. However, what we do know is that some people find it very difficult to balance. Why do the eyes make a difference? Because when you fix with your eyes, it actually holds you. So these sorts of problems can be a bit of a challenge. Some research at Sheffield University looked at the ability of dyslexic people to do that sort of task while they could do something else. So they got these dyslexic kids to walk along an upturned bench. You know, there's a narrow bit at the top. So off they went, balancing along there, fine. And then they got them to count to 1 to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And these kids could do all of it. And then they said, walk along the bench while you're counting to 10. And they fell off. Because sometimes the overload on the system is too much. So as a child, I can do one thing at a time. A bit like my husband, really. Didn't say that. Oh, God, it's on film. Don't show him. Sometimes dyslexic kids can do one thing at a time. They can do things very well, which is why drafting systems are so good. I get my ideas down. Okay, now I'll look at the spelling. Now I'll look at the punctuation. which is so much easier on a computer than it is by hand. And the number of dyslexic people I have met who have said to me, everybody who's not dyslexic gets it right first time. No, they don't. But they think they do. So, we have difficulties going on. We may have speech and language processing difficulties. We've talked about before, we alluded through glue ear or through other areas. You may also have people perhaps with Asperger's syndrome. All of these conditions do not negate another one being there. You can have a child who's ADHD, attention hyperactivity disorder, who is also dyslexic. So what happens sometimes is that people think about putting children in single boxes. And it's my experience over the years that actually it's not quite as easy as that. Sometimes they may have one condition which is more prevalent than anything else, but there are other things that are going on as well. And we need to be aware of that. You've got culture shock. You're coming into a country as a refugee. My goodness, you don't want to be there. You'd rather be in the country you've just left. But for whatever reason, you've got to be there, and you've got to be accepted in the culture. You've got to be accepted by the peer group. You've got to learn the language. You've got to learn the culture. But your parents might want you to eat the same foods, dress the same way, speak the other language. So you've got one language going on in school, another language going on after school. There's all sorts of things and behaviours which may be different, and the kids want to fit in. How much more difficult is it for someone who has learning difficulties? If you go to Belgium, you've got to learn 3 languages. When I was lecturing in India, those children had to learn 4 or more languages in order to matriculate. The time we left, we got Western India to agree to only 2. And the teachers there felt that this was a huge achievement. But if you can't do 2, it's a problem. Because you can't matriculate. My son, who is this architect, who Phil referred to before, now has a young lady friend, very nice girl, right, from Paris, right? She lives in England, she's been there for 6 years, she has a beautiful French accent. And he said to me, I'm going to go and try and learn French. He managed 1 class. He said, I'm getting my money back. So I said, what happened? He said, well, the teacher was there. He said, and she believes in teaching in French. He said, I wanted her to explain why. So she's writing in French, and she's got all these funny sort of symbols that are going on everywhere. I couldn't do it. That doesn't mean to say he can't do very well at the job he does. But the language, even at 31, and he now doesn't have lack of self-esteem, even with that confidence, still a problem learning another language. Natasha, where is she? Is she outside? Yes? Could you ask her to come in? She's got a story, which she's a bit nervous about talking in front of everybody. So I'm going to tell her a story, get her to tell you a story about her brother in a minute. Okay. You'll have to shout so that they can hear.
I'm just wondering if learning other languages could also translate into learning other subjects. See, children in school perhaps are learning one language or 2 languages, but it's not just languages, it's other subjects.
Yes. Well, that, of course, is a problem.
Other languages.
Yes. So you mean you're learning geography or history or something in another language? Very difficult. I have met dyslexic children who've had to move country, and their parents have chosen to put them into an international school so that they can continue with the language of birth, because they're finding this other language learning so challenging. So you go into science, you go into geography, you go into history, wherever you are, in your own language. And then suddenly you've got to learn it in another language, and you're going to start failing there. So what does that do to your self-esteem? But you need to make that balance. I mean, if you've only got a very mild dyslexic problem and you've got good self-esteem, you might cope very well. but it is about the level of dyslexia, the knowledge and understanding of all the teachers, and your ability to cope in the class. It's also automaticity, the ability to do this, to do it quickly, without having to think. Because so often teachers say to me, particularly in a bilingual situation, the child seems slow. Well, why do they seem slow? Because they're trying to translate everything. And they're trying to process everything, and they were having a problem in one language. But you can have somebody like Einstein who is dyslexic, somebody like Van Gogh who was dyslexic, and a lot of other people who had that difficulty, who had that challenge at that level. All of this, of course, can contribute to a loss of motivation. Other challenges that we see in multicultural environments, well, what is the definition of dyslexia? Right? If you look up definitions of dyslexia, they vary slightly, but that variance also gives you a different number of people, a different percentage of people who are dyslexic. Within England, in a monolingual environment, we believe that 4% of any given population are severely dyslexic, and a further 6% have mild to moderate difficulties, making your 10. There are other environments where the numbers vary slightly. Identifying dyslexia, who identifies it? There are specialist teacher assessments, there are psychological assessments. I would be very, very careful about saying to a parent without having gone through that process, no, your child's not dyslexic, he's lazy. And I still see that. You don't know. Nobody knows until a child has been through an assessment by somebody who knows what they're looking for. The remediation of techniques, I would love to think that out of today, there were a couple of people who said, actually, I want to become the dyslexia specialist for this area. You will be inundated with pupils. You can come out of your classroom, work 1-to-1, 1-to-2, great way of working. You can go back in, teach the other teachers how to manage dyslexic children in geography, in history, as the lady was saying, in your English class. But you need to have somebody who is highly specialist and knows what they're doing. One of the problems that we were talking about coming back last night, Phil, was about stigma and removing the stigma. For many, many years, people hid dyslexia in the UK. We had a lot of famous people who suddenly came out and said, I'm dyslexic. You know, Richard Branson of Virgin, Tom Cruise. Yeah, you all know Tom Cruise. Right? And other people who said, actually, I can achieve dyslexia, will never stand in my way. Those people led the way for many, many young people to feel that it's okay to be dyslexic. And in fact, we've got a bit of a reversal. We have many parents who have children struggling who say, well, he must be dyslexic, because they'd rather say he was dyslexic than he's slow. So there are differences there as well. Policy and practice, of course, come from groups like this putting pressure on government, putting pressure on teachers' unions to actually change the way people work, to make teachers more knowledgeable and effect good practice. We need to be aware of other languages. You are all teaching, as I understand it, children who speak more than one language. The structure of languages are different. It can be challenging. We have areas in London, well, I spoke to one head teacher who told me that she's got 86 languages being spoken in her school. That's a lot of languages. And she doesn't have enough assistance to be able to explain or support those children. However, very often we do have a predominance of one other or two other languages and people who are expert in that field. And it's well worth some time trying to understand how other languages are constructed and what the influence of those languages are on your work. And we also have to remember the parental attitudes to special educational needs. I went to a school of a particular ethnic minority and I asked who the special needs coordinator was, and we have one in every school in England. And they said, she's not here. And I said, well, where is she? And they said, well, she's not allowed to be here at parents' evenings. Nobody really knows that she's in the school. And I said, why not? And they said, because if other parents saw that the child was getting help from the special needs coordinator because the child is dyslexic or something else, it is likely to reduce their marriageability. And I said, what on earth do you mean? Well, this is stigma. We won't marry our girls off if there's something wrong with them. It's awareness of other cultures. If you're going to work with people in other cultures, please do. Natasha, come forward. Thank you.
Okay, hello, my name's Natasha, and I know some of you, and we were talking earlier on, and I can't do it. Deep breath, channel myself. I have two brothers. I'm half French and half Polish, and we were brought up by myself and my second, the middle child, speaking French with my mother and English at school. My younger brother, who's 6 years younger than me, is dyslexic. He's now 42 years old. I'm breathing deeply. This is really difficult for me. I can't do this. Yes, I can. Anyway, I was just telling Lindsay that many years ago, my brother was considered to be stupid. Now, his name is Stefan. And my other brother and I were quite good academically and went to university, etc. And he was told to leave school at 15 and do what they call in the UK a YTS, and so he became a plumber. He also went on to open two businesses. He's a rescue diver. He's a black belt judo instructor. He's a high achiever. I'm extremely proud of my dyslexic brother. He can't spell to save his life, so I always take the mickey out of him about his spelling. He taught himself to read because there was no one to help him, as the educators considered him to be a bit thick. He's not thick. The main issue that I wanted to say was that my mother was blamed because she's French and she was bringing us up bilingually. The teachers continually called her into school and insisted on not speaking French with him, but also with myself and the middle brother. And my poor mother didn't have any support whatsoever. But for anyone who has dyslexic children, they tend to be quite high achievers in other areas. Can I stop now? You can. Thank you.
Brilliant. Natasha, that was brilliant. Thank you very much. Just notice how she felt. She's a highly competent, non-dyslexic person who teaches. Right? We get our kids to stand up in front of the class. Right? We get our kids to read out loud. Your turn, your turn, your turn, your turn. She's off in the toilet. Why? We know why. If you want your children to achieve, become a counsellor for them, become a carer for them in a way that is not sympathetic, but that is empathetic. Give your children the opportunity of shining, like Natasha's brother, who's opened his business and become a black belt and become a diver and all these other things. She's right. Look for what is good in other areas. Don't let these kids feel that because they can't spell or because they have trouble with reading or handwriting, that they are thick. Because many of them will not have the benefit of going on to achieve because they won't have that sort of support around them. Do not always assume it's because another language. The research I mentioned before saying that it can be 7 or 8 years before somebody is competent in academic language, even if they're not dyslexic, is a lifetime for a child. If you think there is a problem, have some input first. Because if it turns out that there isn't another problem, so they've had a bit of extra help. If it turns out that there was, the child has lost out. And finally, the future. Just remember that dyslexic kids are as entitled as anybody else to feel good and safe at school and achieve, and to go on to have a successful career. Offer a realistic future for them, something based on their intellect, the way they speak, the way they draw, the way they get that information across. Don't be blinded by the fact that they may have problems with memory or literacy. Work on those areas while encouraging them. Build on their dreams. If they've got a dream, help them achieve it. All I would say is that in all my years of teaching, the most rewarding, the most exciting was working with young people who were clearly able, but who felt as though they were nothing, and to be able to help turn that around and watch them open up like buds into flowers. And I wish you every success identifying and working with your dyslexic learners. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much. We have a little gift for you and a certificate. That is a book about Thessaloniki and a very colorful certificate.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for coming.
It's really nice, thank you.
All this way.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much.